Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of CRT's Cozy Corner, Shakespeare Edition. I am so thrilled because my birthday is coming up in just a couple of days, and I thought, what better way to celebrate my birthday than by reading my favorite Shakespearean tragedy, King Lear. King Lear was the very first Shakespeare play that I ever got to do, and I played the Fool. So I am very excited to read this story to you today, and I hope you are too. So if we're ready, let's go ahead and take a deep breath. And we will get started. High above King Lear's castle, crows were circling in the bruised sky, while in the distance a wolf let out a plaintive howl. Inside, Lear had gathered his 3 daughters and his chief nobles in the main hall. "I have an important announcement to make," he declared. "I am old and tired. It is my intention to shake off the burdens of kingship, so I can enjoy what remains of my advanced years in peace." The king called his trusted advisor, the Earl of Kent. "Hand me the map," he ordered. Kent ceremoniously handed over a scroll, which Lear spread out on the table in front of him. "I've divided my kingdom into 3, said the king, sweeping his hand over the map. He turned to his daughters. "Tell me, which of you loves me most? She shall have the largest share. Goneril, my eldest born, speak first." Goneril stepped up, forward, clasped her hands, and bowed her head, as if in prayer. "Sir," she began, "I love you more than words can say. Beyond all that is precious, more than my health, more than my beauty, as much as any child ever loved a father." Lear nodded. "From here to here," he said, pointing to his map, "with deep forests, rich meadows, and plentiful streams, this land I give to you and your husband, the Duke of Albany. Regan, my second daughter, wife of the Duke of Cornwall, what say you?" asked Lear. "I love you in every way my sister describes, only I find she comes up short compared to my adoration of you, my dear father, which goes beyond all other joys," Regan gushed. "Very good," said Lear. "To you and your future heirs I give this portion of the kingdom to rule." He pointed at the map, then said to Cordelia, "Now, last but not least, my youngest child." "Oh, what can I say?" Cordelia wondered. "Love and be silent? I'm sure my heart is more eloquent than my tongue." Lear continued, "What will you say to gain a share more opulent than those I gave your sisters? Speak." "Nothing, my lord," came Cordelia's reply. "Nothing? Nothing. Nothing will come of nothing," Lear bellowed. "Speak again." Cordelia trembled. I cannot leave my heart into my mouth. I love you as a daughter is bound to love a father, no more or less. I am not yet married, but I shall never marry like my sisters to give all my love to my father and none to my husband." "So young and untender?" cried Lear. "So young, my lord, and true," Cordelia insisted. "Let it be so," Lear raged. "Your truth is all you shall have. I disown you. From now on you are nothing to me." Kent stepped forward nervously. "Your Majesty, I beg you think again." "Silence, Kent," Lear roared. "Do not come between the dragon and his wrath. The last third of my kingdom will be split between Goneril and Regan. From this moment I hand over my power to them as queens. I will live a month at a time in each of their castles. All I wish is to keep a troop of 100 knights, the title of king, and to be treated with the respect my age deserves." Kent was horrified. "King, this is hideous rashness. You must have lost your mind to give up your kingdom to flattery," he protested. "Cordelia does not love you the least, but the most." Lear's face clouded over. "No more," he thundered. "You are banished. You have 6 days to leave the kingdom." Kent bowed his head. "Then farewell, my king," he said. "May the gods protect you, sweet Cordelia. Adieu." And with a heavy heart he left the court that had been his home and where he had been a loyal servant. Lear watched Kent leave the hall, then pulled himself upright to his throne to address the room. "Now then, we have a guest. The King of France is here to propose marriage to Cordelia. Your Majesty, do you take or leave her now she has nothing?" The King of France bowed to Lear, then to Cordelia. What had just taken place had only persuaded him that Cordelia was a faithful daughter who would be a loving wife. "Fair, honest Cordelia," he said, "if you will have me, I will happily take you to be the Queen of France." "I will," Cordelia replied. Bitter tears welled in her eyes as she bade farewell to her sisters. "Look after our father." "You cannot tell us what to do," hissed Goneril. "We are in charge now. Be gone." At the Earl of Gloucester's castle, Edmund, Gloucester's younger son, was pacing angrily. "Why should I inherit nothing from our father just because I'm younger than Edgar and have another mother? I'm just as clever and deserving," he fumed. Suddenly an idea came to him. He sat down at his desk, dipped his quill pen in ink, and wrote a letter. "Well, let's see how this letter changes things," he thought with a smirk. When Gloucester arrived, his head was reeling with the shocking events he had just witnessed at King Lear's court. He tried to tell his son about it, but Edmund seemed distracted. "Is that a letter in your hand, Edmund?" he asked. "What is the news that agitates you?" "Nothing, my lord," Edmund replied, making a show of stuffing the letter into his pocket. Gloucester raised an eyebrow. "Nothing? If it is nothing, then there's no need to hide it from me, is there?" "Oh, well, it's from Edgar," said Edmund. "I've not read it in full, but I do not think it is fit for your eyes. I can only hope he wrote it as a test of my loyalty to you." "Give it to me, let's see," said Gloucester. He snatched the letter from his son, straightened his spectacles, and read, "I've come to realize this reverence of old age keeps our inheritance from us until we ourselves are too old to enjoy it. If our father could be put to sleep, I would share half his fortunes with you. Come to me, and I will tell you my plan. Your brother, Edgar." Gloucester threw down the letter in disgust. "Conspiracy! How can a son be such a monster as to plot against his own father?" Edmund assumed a soothing tone. "Father, let me speak to him," he said. "I'll find out for you what he means by this letter." That evening, Edmund waited in the gloom outside the castle. He looked out at the wild heath and stretched all the way to the sea, watching for his brother to return home from a day's hunting. As soon as Edgar came into view, Edmund started wringing his hands and sighing. "Oh dear, oh dear." "What troubles you?" Edgar asked. "Oh, Edgar, our father is convinced you are plotting to kill him. I tried to reason with him, but you know how he is when his mind is set," said Edmund. "He has ordered his guard to kill you. You must fly this place now while it's dark." Edgar shook his head incredulously. "Some villain has done me wrong," he said. "Look, torches!" cried Edmund. "Father's guard is coming. You must run." Edgar pulled his cloak tight around his shoulders and fled into the night. "There's an old disguised shepherd's hut out on the heath. I can stay there until I can find a way to resolve this matter," he thought. "And I will disguise myself as a crazed beggar. From now on, I am not Edgar, but poor Tom." Edmund watched his brother disappear over the horizon. "I will tell our father that I fought fiercely to defend him," he thought. Gritting his teeth, he took his sword and drew the blade across his arm. A little blood should convince him. As intended, Lear spent the first part of his retirement at Goneril's castle, but it wasn't to be the leisurely decline into old age he had imagined. His daughter bossed him around, and her servants no longer bowed and curtsied to him as they would have when he was their king. For her part, Goneril seethed with resentment that Lear treated her home as his own and let his band of knights run riot. "I refuse to speak to the idle old man," she said, and she ordered her steward, Oswald, to ignore him too. Unbeknown to Lear, his loyal servant, the Earl of Kent, hadn't gone into exile. Instead, he had disguised himself as a peasant and followed his master to Goneril's castle, determined to see that he did not come to harm. He was waiting at the castle gates when Lear came back from a ride. "Take my horse to the stables, tell the kitchen staff to prepare my dinner, and send my fool to entertain me," Lear ordered one of the knights. Then he turned to Kent. "How now? Who are you, and what do you want?" he asked. "I'm an honest-hearted fellow, and as poor as the king, I wish to serve," said Kent. Lear looked at Kent up and down. He did not recognize his servant without his usual fine clothes. "Come in, talk with me, and we shall see." But inside, dinner had not been served. Lear called Oswald. "Where's my dinner, and where is Goneril?" he demanded. Oswald rolled his eyes, and he was about to turn back on Lear. "Don't you know who I am?" bellowed Lear. "You're my lady's father," replied the steward. "I serve her, and not you." "How dare you speak to me like that, you rascal?" he shouted, slapping him across the face. "I will not be struck," cried Oswald, clutching his cheek. "Queen Goneril shall hear of this." Just as Oswald busted out of the hall, Lear's fool slipped in. "Do you know the difference between a bitter fool and a sweet one?" riddled the jester. Lear shook his head, looking intrigued. "No, teach me, knave. This would be amusing." The fool broke into a chant. The Lord that has decided to give away his land, come place him here by me, and let me take his hand. The sweet and bitter fools will presently appear, in jester's costume here, in royal velvet there. Lear's smile faded. Are you calling me a bitter fool? He asked. The fool shrugged. Indeed, nuncle, you have given away all your other titles. This jester is certainly no fool, Kent remarked. With a crash, the doors to the hall were flung open, and Goneril burst in with her husband, the Duke of Albany, behind her. Your rabble of knights treat my home more like a lowly tavern than a majestic castle, she snapped. And now you have struck my most trusted servant? I will not endure this any more. You must leave. My lady, please, he's your father, said Albany. He tried to put a hand on the queen's arm, but she swatted him away. How hurtful it is to have a thankless child, cried Lear. Very well. Away, away. I have another daughter I can stay with. She will be furious when she hears how you have abused me. Outside, there was a crack of thunder, and lightning ripped open the sky. Lear called to one of his knights. Saddle the horses. We're going to Regan's castle. He turned to Kent. You ride ahead and inform my good friend, the Duke of Gloucester, that we will bring our journey with him. Just as Lear was setting off, Regan and her husband, the Duke of Cornwall, were arriving at Gloucester's castle. They were appalled when he told them Edgar had been plotting to kill him. Edmund showed them his wounded arm. He tried to persuade me to help him, he said. When I refused, he drew his sword and threatened to kill me. See, I have been cut. But when I vowed to defend our father, he fled into the heath. I have disinherited him, said Gloucester. My men will catch him and bring him to justice. Of course, our men will help, said Regan. They were interrupted by raised voices and the clash of swords ringing from outside the castle walls. Two of Gloucester's guards burst into the courtyard, bringing Kent and Oswald with them. We found these two men brawling at the gate, reported one of the guards. Who are you, and what is all this about? Said Gloucester. Oswald stepped forward and scraped a bow. Lady Regan, I bring you news from your sister, he said. This ruffian tried to attack me. My Lord Gloucester, I bring news from King Lear, said Kent. I drew my sword against the scheming knave Oswald, because he has come here to discredit my master. Regan was shocked. That is no way to speak to Queen Goneril's trusted steward, she cried. Lock him in the stocks, joined the Duke of Cornwall. Leave him overnight to learn his lesson. The guards marched Kent over to the stocks, a rough wooden frame that Kent's legs were clamped into without ceremony. Gloucester tried to intervene. Please, you can't put this man in the stocks. He's behaved badly, but it is a grievous sight against a king to punish one of his servants in this matter. Then I will answer for it, said Cornwall. He is no longer a king, argued Regan. It is far worse that Queen Goneril's man should be assaulted. Come, the light is fading. Let's go inside. The crows had come in to roost, and the sun had dipped behind the battlements by the time Lear and his fool arrived at Gloucester's castle. Shivering in the stocks, Kent called, Hail, King Lear, my noble master! Lear rushed over to his servant. Who did this to you? Your son Cornwall and daughter Regan are here, replied Kent. Gloucester tried to stop them, but it was their order. No, cried Lear. How dare they treat my servant and me with such disrespect? Where's my daughter? She is with Cornwall and Gloucester inside, replied Kent. Lear pounded at the castle door, but the guards did not dare let him in. Vengeance, plague, death, confusion! Let me speak with Regan, he raged. The door opened, and out strode Regan and Cornwall, with Gloucester cowering behind them. Did you put my man in the stocks? Bellowed Lear. I gave the order, yes, Cornwall replied, but it was his own actions that put him there. Gloucester, release my man at once, ordered Lear. Gloucester unlocked the stocks, saying quietly to Kent, I am sorry, friend. Lear turned to speak to Regan, but was interrupted by a fanfare of trumpets coming from the castle gates. Aha, said Regan. It is my sister. She wrote to tell me she was coming. The trumpets sounded again, and Goneril, Albany, and their attendants entered the castle courtyard. Welcome, dear sister, cooed Regan, embracing her. Are you not ashamed to look upon me? Said Lear to Goneril. Then he turned to Regan. How can you embrace her when she has so offended me? How have I offended you? Demanded Goneril. Father dearest, I cannot think my sister would fail in her obligation to you. I pray you, return to Goneril until the month is up, coaxed Regan. My house is not yet prepared for your stay. Return to her? No, I would rather go without a roof and wage war against the air, roared Lear. Well, that's your choice, Goneril retorted. A wild storm was raging outside, but it was nothing compared to the tempest that had blown up in Lear's heart. Seeing his 2 daughters united against him, he cried, "You unnatural hags! I will have such revenge on you both." Lear stormed out of the castle with his fool at his heels. "They do me wrong," he wailed. "My heart shall break into 1,000 pieces, but I will not weep. Oh, I shall go mad." Out on the wind-blasted heath, the fool stopped to catch his breath under a tree that had been stripped of its leaves. "Oh, nuncle, come away from the storm," he coaxed. "This cold night will turn us all into fools and madmen." But Lear wouldn't listen. Instead, he stood in the open, his arms flung wide, and howled at the sky. "Blow, winds, and crack your cheeks! Rage, blow, you hurricanes! Blow!" Through the hailing wind came a voice. "Who's there?" A figure took shape, and Kent emerged out of the gloom. He had followed Lear through the storm, and his threadbare peasant's costume was wet through. "Sir, this is no night to be without a roof over your head," he said. "Come, there's a hut nearby, where we can shelter from this foul weather." Kent led Lear and the fool into a crumbling old hut. As they stooped to enter the low doorway, a moan came from inside. It was Edgar, disguised as poor Tom. To convince him he was a harmless madman, he babbled, "Poor Tom's a cold, oh-dee-dee-doo-dee-doo." But he offered to share his bed of straw and his blankets with the wanderers. King Lear had just fallen asleep, and Kent and the fool were watching over him, when light appeared in the doorway, and the Earl of Gloucester stepped in. "Oh, I'm so glad I found you all," he exclaimed. In the dark corner of the hut, Edgar pulled up his blankets so his father would not see his face. But he listened as Gloucester told Kent how he had been turned out of his own castle by Goneril and Regan after objecting to their cruel treatment of King Lear. "The queens are plotting to kill their father," said Gloucester. "I brought my chariot for you to drive the king to Dover. Cordelia is on her way there with the French army to overthrow her sisters." Edgar's heart swelled with love and pride for his father. "Poor Tom's a help you," he said from his corner. He resolved to keep his disguise, but do whatever he could to help his father and the king. Meanwhile, at Gloucester's castle, Edmund handed the Duke of Cornwall a letter he had found in his father's chamber. "As your most loyal servant, it is my duty to show you this letter from Cordelia to my father, though it gives me little pleasure to reveal his treachery," he said gravely. Cornwall took the letter and read, "Cordelia is leading a French invasion to restore Lear to the throne, and Gloucester has promised to support them," he said. "Seek out the traitor and bring him to me," he ordered his guards. "Hang him instantly," joined Regan. "Pluck out his eyes," hissed Goneril. "Goneril, go and tell Albany to prepare your troops for battle," said Cornwall. Edmund ride with her. Regan and I will deal with your father." Edmund bowed to Cornwall and Regan. "I am your humblest servant," he said, and he left with Goneril. When the guards eventually returned with Gloucester, the punishment was swift and merciless. He was bound to a chair, and Regan restrained his head. "Out, vile jelly," cried Cornwall, as he plucked out Gloucester's eyes. "All dark and comfortless," wailed poor blinded Gloucester. "Where is my son Edmund? Why did he not defend me?" "Ha! He is too good to pity you," Regan retorted. "It was he who informed us of your treason." It was only then that Gloucester realized that Edmund had betrayed him and lied about Edgar too. "Oh, I am a fool," he cried. Unable to bear the cruelty of what he had just witnessed, one of Cornwall's servants lunged at his master and stabbed him with a knife. Clutching his wound, Cornwall drew his sword and retaliated with a single fatal blow. As the servant fell dead to the floor, Cornwall called his wife. "I am hurt, Regan. Help me to my chamber." Then, to his remaining servant, he said, "Throw out that eyeless villain. I want him gone from here." Edgar, still disguised as poor Tom, was waiting near the castle gates when Gloucester stumbled out. A kind servant had bandaged the old man's face, but the rags were soaked in blood. "Bless your sweet eyes, they bleed," said Edgar, dismayed. "Who's that?" asked Gloucester. "Your voice sounds familiar. Is it poor Tom? Do you know the way to Dover?" "Aye, master," said Edgar. "Then lead me there, and guide me to the brim of the highest cliff. From there I'll need no further leading," said Gloucester. What a time is this when madmen lead the blind. So the pair set off across the heath to meet their fate at Dover. Edmund rode with Goneril back to her castle. He took her leave with a kiss and the promise that he'd be loyal to her as unto death. Then he rode on to prepare for battle. "Oh, he's so much more of a man than Albany, my milk-livered husband," Goneril swooned, unaware that Edmund had already made a similar promise to Regan. Inside the castle, Albany's greeting was cold. He was appalled to hear how Goneril and Regan had treated their father. "You are not worth the dust the rough wind blows in your face," he told her. "You're a fool," Goneril retorted. "Even now the French army is advancing, and you're concerned with these trifles?" Before she could complain further, a messenger arrived from Regan. Cornwall had died from the wound inflicted by his servant, and Goneril and Albany needed to head immediately to Dover with their troops. The drums of war beat loud and fast as the opposing armies gathered on high ground near Dover. At the French camp, news of her father's plight reached Cordelia. She listened with sorrow as an attendant told her that Lear had arrived at Dover, but had lost his mind and was wearing a crown of weeds and singing to himself that he was the king of the fools. "Search every field and meadow and bring him here," she ordered her guards. "Is there a way to restore his senses?" she asked her doctor. "I can administer a sleeping potion that will bring his mind to rest," the doctor promised. On the other side of the hill, two wretched figures made their way to the bare patch of ground in the middle of a meadow. "Poor Tom, are we nearly at the hill?" asked Gloucester. "Why can't you feel the slope beneath your feet? Listen, do you hear the sea below us?" Edgar replied. "We're already there." "Then leave me here at the edge of the cliff," said Gloucester. "Farewell." He kneeled down and prayed, "Oh, you mighty gods, I now renounce this world. If Edgar lives, bless him." And with that, Gloucester got to his feet and jumped. He landed flat on his face on exactly the same patch of ground and fainted. When Gloucester regained his consciousness, Edgar disguised his voice when he spoke to him. "Oh, sir," he cried, "to fall all that way, either you must be as light as a gossamer feathers, or the gods must wish to preserve your life." "Have I fallen?" asked Gloucester, confused. "Aye, over the cliff from a perilous height," answered Edgar. "Give me your hand, and I'll help you up." As Gloucester rose to his feet, Lear came weaving through the long grass. He was crowned in weeds and singing a strange song to himself. "No, they cannot catch me, for I am the king of... Look, look, a mouse! Peace, peace, this piece of toasted cheese!" "I know that voice," cried Gloucester. "Is that you, King Lear, or do my ears deceive me?" "Aye, every inch a king," answered Lear with a bitter laugh. He plucked a dandelion from his crown and held it up. The flower trembled in his grasp. "See how my subject quakes." Gloucester was dismayed at the change in the king's manner. "Do you not know me?" he asked. Seeing his old friend blinded and grief-stricken brought Lear briefly to his senses. "But I know you well enough, Gloucester, my friend," he said. "There he is!" came a voice, and 3 of Cordelia's men marched over to them. Like a startled hare, Lear stiffened for a moment, then darted into the undergrowth. "If you want to catch me, you'll have to run," he called over his shoulder. But he did not get far before the young soldiers caught hold of him. They wrapped a warm robe around the king's frail frame and led him to safety. Having become separated from his master outside Dover, Kent arrived at the French camp and was relieved to discover that Lear had already been brought there. Cordelia recognized him, despite his peasant's disguise, and greeted him as an old friend. She took him to the tent where Lear was sleeping under her doctor's care. "Please, your majesty," said the king, "King Lear has slept long enough. It's time to wake him." "Oh, my dear father," said Cordelia, "let this kiss repair those violent harms my 2 sisters have done to you." As Cordelia bent down and kissed her father, Lear began to wake up. "Where have I been? Where am I?" he asked, rubbing his eyes. "I am very foolish, old man, and I fear I am not in my perfect mind, but I think this lady is my child, Cordelia." "And so I am," wept Cordelia. "But why do you weep?" asked Lear. "You have every cause to despise me." Cordelia embraced her father. "There is no cause, she assured him. The morning of the battle began in eerie silence, soon followed by a terrible cacophony of trumpets, murderous battle cries, the clash of swords, and the thundering of horses' hoofs. It seemed to be over no sooner than it had begun. The French were defeated, and men on both sides began the dreadful task of burying their dead. At Regan's insistence, Edmund had led her troops into battle. His soldiers had captured Lear, Cordelia, and Kent. Now he marched them off to the British camp. "Take them away and lock them up," ordered Edmund. He beckoned one of his captains and surreptitiously handed him a letter. "Go after our prisoners and deal with them," he said. "Follow the instructions in this note, and you will be rewarded." The captain nodded and went to carry out his mission. Bruised and battle-weary, Albany returned to the British camp where Goneril, Regan, and Edmund were waiting. "Sir," said Edmund, "I have imprisoned Cordelia and the miserable old king. We will put them on trial tomorrow morning." Albany snapped. "It is not your place to do such a thing," and he sent his guards to release the prisoners. "Too late for that," thought Edmund. Regan protested. "But Albany, I put Edmund in charge of my troops to act in place of my husband." "But he is not your husband," retorted Albany. "Not yet," replied Regan. "Not ever," spat Goneril. "He has promised to me." That was as much as Albany could bear. "Edmund, I charge you with capital treason," he said. "You will face trial by combat with me." But as Albany squared up to Edmund, a knight stepped forward. His sword was already drawn, and his visor covered his face. "False to your father and brother, conspiring against the Duke of Albany. Edmund, you toad, you traitor," said the unbeknownst knight. "I will fight you." The two men fought a tough duel. Edmund was bigger and stronger, but his opponent seemed able to predict and dodge all his best moves, as though they had sparred many times before. Eventually, the knight struck Edmund to the ground. Goneril howled in despair, and Regan bent double in agony, crying, "Oh, sick, I am sick!" A servant took Regan to her tent, and Goneril hurried after them. Fighting for breath, Edmund addressed the knight. "I am guilty of all that you have charged me with, and more beside. But who are you?" The knight removed his helmet. "I am your father's son," he said. "Your brother, Edgar." "Edgar!" exclaimed Albany. "Where have you been, and do you know what has become of your father?" Edgar described how he had disguised himself as poor Tom and guided his blind father across the heath to Dover. Then he told how he had finally revealed his identity to Gloucester to ask his blessing before going into battle. Sadly, his poor heart was too weak to support the extremes of grief and joy. He died smiling. A breathless nobleman came running, a stricken look on his face and a bloody dagger in his hand. "What is this bloody knife?" asked Edgar. "It has come from her heart. She is dead," gasped the nobleman. "Dead? Who is dead?" asked Albany. "Queen Goneril, sir. She poisoned her sister, then thrust his dagger into her own heart," answered the nobleman. As he lay dying, Edmund felt deep remorse. "Despite all that I have done, I do wish some good before I die. I sent my captain to kill Cordelia in prison and to make it look like her own last desperate act. I hope there is time to stop him." With one last gasp, Edmund died. But his confession had come too late. Albany's guards had gone to release the prisoners and found Cordelia already dead. Now they trudged back across the camp with Kent to deliver the tragic news. A lone, broken figure stumbled behind them. It was King Lear, holding Cordelia's limp, lifeless body in his arms. Exhausted, his legs crumpled beneath him, and he wailed, "Howl, howl, howl, howl! She is gone forever." Kent went to the king and kneeled down beside him. "My good master," he said softly. Lear pushed him away without looking to see who it was. "A plague upon you, murderous traitors, every one!" he cried. "I might have saved her. Oh, Cordelia, Cordelia, stay a little. Have you no breath at all?" He kissed her and looked up, his eyes suddenly bright with hope. "But look, her lips, she breathes!" And with that brief moment of rapture, his eyes clouded over his body, slumped to the ground. Edgar bowed his head. "He has gone," he said. "The old man has been through such hardship. I can only wonder how he endured so much," joined Kent. Albany called for the stretcher-bearers. "Carry the dead with due ceremony to the castle. We will give them a grand state funeral," he said. "Our business now is woe." "We must learn from this sad time and the suffering of our elders," Edgar said gravely, "to speak what we feel, not what we ought to say. The weight of this sad time we must obey, speak what we feel, not what we ought to say." Edgar, Act 5, Scene 3. And on that happy note, I will see you next week.